So, what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about how to measure things in a circuit. Um, really measure things in a circuit. The devices that we use for that. What I have here is a multimeter. A multimeter is a device that has incorporated multiple meters. Obviously, that's why it's called a multimeter. This device can measure voltage, it can measure current, it can measure resistance, and it sort of can measure capacitance, but it doesn't do, whatever. Devices that are used to measure voltage are voltage meters. Okay, that's pretty. Also can be called other things, but we'll just call them voltage meters. Devices that measure current, we call them amp meters, and devices that measure resistance, we call them ohmmeters. So this multimeter has all three of those meters built into it. It's a wonderful device. But what's important is that you understand how to measure potential, measure current, even measure resistance, okay, using this multimeter. Okay, cool? So how do I do that? Well, if I want to measure voltage, remember when we were talking about parallel circuits? And in a parallel circuit, I could have a separate track run on the top, which I can hardly see. So imagine I have this setup, which we had in parallel circuits. We could say that the potential difference, or the voltage from this point to that point, was exactly the same, whether you go through the top or whether you go through the bottom. So when you use a voltage meter, you can measure by not breaking the circuit. You can simply say, I want to measure the voltage across this resistor, plug in my little voltage meter, use my probes, and basically connect another section of that circuit. Okay? So that voltage meter is measuring just the potential difference from this point to that point. Okay? Cool. So that's how you'd use a voltage meter. You would take your ohm meter, you plug it in, like so, and you would literally just take your probes in the circuit and put it right here. Okay? You're allowing the circuit to take two paths, one to go through this resistor, one to go through your voltage meter, but because it's a voltage meter and you're measuring the potential difference, that potential difference won't change whether part of the current goes to the top or the bottom. So it makes no difference. Okay? So that's how you measure using a voltage meter. Now if I wanted to measure current, the story is a little bit different. Back to this parallel diagram. We realized that if current was generated here, that it would split off into two separate values. You'd have a portion of the current go through the top and a portion of the current go through the bottom. So that means that the way we measure voltage can't be the way we measure current. Because if I just simply made an amp meter here, that means I'm only measuring part of the current. Okay? Part of it is still going through the resistor, and another part of it is going through the ammeter. So that's not a way in which we can measure current. How you measure current is you literally have to break the circuit. Okay? You have to go in and break the circuit. Okay? It has to be integrated into that circuit one way or another. You can't just simply use the voltmeter and take probes and put it in there. Okay? That doesn't work because part of that current is still going to go through the resistor and part of that current is going to go through your amp meter. So you're not making an accurate measurement of the current. Okay? So you literally have to break that circuit in order to install that amp meter. So you would just take this section of the circuit out and you would just take your amp meter and you plug it in there so that all that current that would normally go through this section of the wire is now going through your amp meter. Okay? So that's how you'd measure Ampage. That's how you'd use an amp meter. You break the circuit and you install that amp meter. Voltage, on the other hand, you don't have to break the circuit. Cool? Now, in that case above, where we have that section that's a parallel circuit, the voltmeter, if you wanted to measure the potential across those, you just do it like this. But realize that you're going to have a problem measuring the voltage across this or this individually. Okay? Depending on how the circuit is set up, it can be a difficult thing to do or it could be an easy thing to do, depending entirely on the circuit. You could literally do this, measuring the potential across that section of the circuit. You'd develop something like this. Okay? But if you were trying to do this and you ended up doing this, you're not going to get the same reading. Okay? Cool? Now, if you were trying to measure the ampage, you would have to break that circuit. You would have to plug it in here, or plug it in here, and remove the circuit there. Okay? So that the only current that's going through this section is going through the amp meter and not through the circuit itself. Okay? Now, ohm resistance is it's pretty simple actually. If I wanted to measure the individual resistors of their resistance value, I'd set my multimeter to resistance and just simply measure across the resistors. Okay, that's all I would do, is I'd measure across the resistors. It's not that I have to break the circuit. It's the same methodology that we use for voltage. So that's all you do for resistance. Now, if I wanted to measure the equivalent resistance for these two resistors, I could do this. That'd be measuring that equivalent resistance. Okay? Or if I wanted to measure the resistance of the entire circuit, I could do something like this. Okay? That way I'm measuring the resistance here, here, and here at the same time. Cool? So the ohm meter is nice because you get to do things like that. Okay? You get to measure big chunks of resistance at the same time. Cool? So that's how you use an ohm meter. Now it's important that you realize that voltage you can measure across. You don't break the circuit. Okay? Woo! Ampage, you have to break the circuit. And then resistance, you don't have to break the circuit, much in the same way as voltage. Cool? So that's a basic rundown of the multimeter.